Wife emptied our joint account on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I was sitting in a conference room in Denver watching snow come down outside the window when my phone buzzed with a bank notification. I looked at it for maybe 3 seconds. Then I put the phone face down on the table and went back to the meeting. She had no idea I'd been waiting for exactly that moment. Let me back up. Tina and I met when I was 31. She was working at a dental office front desk. I was there for a cleaning, and she made a joke about my insurance coverage that actually made me laugh out loud in the waiting room. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. Married for 16 years after that. 2 kids. Our son is 14 now. Our daughter just turned 11. For most of those 16 years, I thought we had a good life. Maybe not perfect, but good. I'm an electrical contractor. I built my business from nothing. A van, some tools, a license, and a willingness to answer the phone at 6 in the morning. By the time I turned 42, I had 12 employees, 2 commercial contracts with property management firms, and a reputation in our county that I was genuinely proud of. We had the house, a 4-bedroom colonial I'd put a down payment on, with money I'd saved for 6 years. We had 2 cars. The kids were in good schools. My wife had stopped working when our daughter was born, and I never once complained about that. Never once. The first time something felt wrong was about 2 years ago. I came home early on a Friday. Job site got rained out, and my wife was on the back porch on her phone. She didn't hear me come in. I wasn't trying to sneak up on her. I walked through the kitchen, saw her through the glass door, and was about to slide it open when I heard her laughing. Not a regular laugh. Something softer. Something I hadn't heard her use with me in a long time. I stopped. I listened. I know how that sounds, but I listened. I know how that sounds, but I listened. She said, "He doesn't know anything. He never pays attention." Then she laughed again. I went back to the kitchen, made some noise, got myself a glass of water. By the time I walked out to the porch, she was on a different topic entirely, telling whoever was on the line about a show she'd been watching. I didn't say anything. I sat down next to her and asked how her day was. She said, "Fine." I said mine too, and I made a mental note. Over the next few months, I paid attention in a way I hadn't before. Not obsessively, not paranoid. I just watched. The gym trips that ran long. The new habit of putting her phone face down whenever I walked into a room. The way she'd get mildly irritated whenever I changed my schedule and came home at an unexpected time. Small things individually. Together they added up to something I didn't want to name. I talked to my accountant, Neil, before I talked to anyone else. Neil is the kind of man who has seen everything and reacts to nothing. I laid out what I was noticing and asked him a simple question. If my marriage were ending badly, what should I be aware of financially? He didn't flinch. He just pulled out a legal pad and started writing. We spent 2 hours going through everything. The house, the business accounts, the joint savings, the retirement funds. Neil walked me through what was exposed and what wasn't. He referred me to a family law attorney named Patricia, not the one from my county. A woman 2 counties over, who he said was the best in a 3-state radius. I met with her the following week. She was direct in a way I appreciated. She told me that in our state, marital assets are subject to equitable distribution, which doesn't mean equal, but it does mean a judge has broad discretion. She told me the business was likely the biggest variable. She told me that if my wife had been having an affair and could be proven to have dissipated marital assets, spent them, hid them, transferred them to a third party, that could significantly change the outcome. Dissipation of marital assets. I wrote that phrase down. Then I asked her what I should do right now, today, before anything official had happened. She looked at me for a moment. "Document everything," she said, "and don't move money. Don't close accounts, don't shift assets, don't do anything that looks like you're hiding something. If you do that, the court will be looking at you instead of her." I nodded. "But," she said, "there's nothing stopping you from organizing your affairs." I understood what she meant. What I did next took about 8 months. I wasn't in a hurry. I didn't tip my hand. I went about my life, went to my son's baseball games, helped my daughter with her science project, had dinner with my wife most nights, and quietly, methodically, organized my affairs. The business restructuring was the most important piece. I'd always operated as a sole proprietor with a single LLC. Neil and Patricia worked together on this. I established a second entity, a holding company, and transferred my commercial contracts and the majority of my equipment into it. This wasn't hiding anything. It was legitimate business reorganization, the kind that happens every day. All of it was documented, filed properly, reported to the IRS. But it meant the visible, easily valued parts of my business were now held in a structure that was considerably more complex to unravel in a divorce proceeding. The joint savings account, the one my wife had access to, I left alone. There was about $43,000 in it. I stopped adding to it. Everything I made above our household expenses went into the business accounts. I also hired a private investigator. I want to be honest about this part. I didn't enjoy it. It felt like something people do in bad movies. But Patricia told me that documented proof of an affair, while it doesn't automatically change the financial outcome, does give you leverage, and leverage matters in settlement negotiations. I paid the investigator for 6 weeks. He gave me what I needed. His name was Brennan. He was matter-of-fact about the whole thing in a way that somehow made it easier. The man was someone she'd apparently met at her gym. His name was Corey. He was 38, divorced, worked in pharmaceutical sales. Brennan gave me dates, times, locations, photographs. I looked at everything once, put it in a folder, and gave the folder to Patricia. I didn't confront my wife. I know that's the part that's hardest to explain. Every instinct I had said to walk into the kitchen and put the folder on the table and say, "What is this?" But Patricia had been clear. The moment I showed my hand, the clock started. She would call her own lawyer. Accounts would get frozen. Things would get chaotic and expensive and unpredictable. My job was to be ready before the chaos started, not to start it myself. So I waited. My wife was the one who finally pulled the trigger, and she did it in a way I honestly didn't expect. I was in Denver for a commercial job. We'd picked up a contract with a hotel renovation, and I'd flown out to oversee the first week of electrical work. My wife knew I'd be gone for at least 10 days. The kids were staying with my mother for the week, which she had arranged herself and which I now understood was not a coincidence. The bank notification came on Tuesday morning. Full withdrawal from the joint savings. $43,000. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was her. I let her ring twice, then answered. "I need to talk to you," she said. "Okay," I said. She told me she wanted the divorce. She said she hadn't been happy for years. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, and she knew this wasn't what I wanted to hear, but she needed to be honest with me. Her voice had the careful, measured quality of someone who had rehearsed this. I wondered how many times she'd practiced it. "I also used the savings," she said. "I needed it to get set up. I know that's hard to hear, but I know," I said. "The bank sent me a notification." Silence. "I understand," I said. "We can talk about everything when I get back." Another silence. Longer this time. I think she was expecting something different. Yelling, maybe. Begging. Some kind of reaction that would tell her how much damage she'd done. "That's it," she said. "We'll talk when I get home," I said. I hung up and went back to work. Here's what she didn't know. She didn't know that 2 months earlier, I'd had a very specific conversation with Patricia about joint accounts and what happens when one spouse withdraws funds without the other's consent in anticipation of divorce proceedings. In our state, that's considered dissipation of marital assets. It doesn't matter whose name is on the account. It doesn't matter that she had legal access to the money. The timing. Withdrawing everything right before initiating divorce, while the other spouse is out of town and the children have been sent away, is exactly the kind of pattern family court judges recognize and respond to. She didn't know that I had 8 months of documented preparation, and she had 10 days. She didn't know that the business she assumed was worth a simple number was now held inside a structure that would take her attorneys considerable time and money to value. Time and money she didn't have, because she just spent her opening move on $43,000 that was now going to be Exhibit A in a dissipation claim. And she didn't know about Brennan's folder. I finished the week in Denver. I flew home on Friday evening. She was there when I walked in, sitting at the kitchen table. She'd clearly expected a different energy from me, because she looked uncertain in a way I hadn't seen before. I put down my bag. I asked if the kids were coming home tomorrow. She said yes. I said good. I went and showered and changed clothes and came back downstairs and made coffee, and we sat at the table together, and I looked at her and said, "I think we both know where this is going, so let's make sure we do it right." She said she'd already contacted an attorney. I said I had too. She said she thought it would be pretty straightforward. The house, the savings, the business. I said, "Which business?" She looked at me. I said, "I have 2 entities now. Have had for about 8 months. You might want to mention that to your attorney." She didn't say anything. I drank my coffee. "Also, the savings you withdrew. Patricia says that's going to be characterized as dissipation. The timing makes it textbook. You'll want to get ahead of that. Patricia, she repeated. My attorney, I said. She's very good. What followed was 4 months I wouldn't wish on anyone. Not because I was afraid of losing. By that point, I was fairly confident in my position. But because it's just ugly. Divorce is ugly. It's ugly for the kids. It's ugly for the families. It's ugly to sit in rooms with lawyers and talk about your life in terms of line items and valuations and what the judge is likely to find reasonable. My wife hired a sharp attorney. He came in aggressive. He pushed back on the business restructuring, claimed it was done in anticipation of divorce and should be unwound. Patricia was ready for that argument. She had 16 months of documented business filings, tax records, and the referral letter from Neil dated well before anyone had said the word divorce out loud. Her attorney also tried to make the case that I'd been a controlling spouse who had deliberately kept her out of financial decisions. Patricia put Neil on the stand, and he walked through 8 years of joint tax returns. My wife's name was on every account, every return. She had had full access to every statement the entire time we were married. She'd simply never chosen to look. The dissipation claim on the $43,000 was upheld. That money was credited to my share of the marital estate. The house was sold and split. That was fair, I thought. We'd both lived there. Both kids had grown up there. Both kids had grown up there. I wasn't going to fight over the house. The business, the restructured, properly filed, legitimately organized business, was valued at significantly less than what my wife's attorney had hoped for, because the holding company structure meant a forensic accountant would have needed to spend months untangling it, and at her attorney's hourly rate, that wasn't economical. They settled on a figure. I paid it. I considered it the cost of proper planning. The retirement accounts were split per the standard QDRO process. Fine. What her attorney never brought up, and what I think was a strategic miscalculation on their part, was the affair. I don't know if they thought I didn't have evidence, or if they calculated that courts rarely change financial outcomes based on marital misconduct in our state, or if Corey's name appearing in a deposition would have complicated things in ways they didn't want. But they never raised it, which meant Patricia never had to raise it either, though she was prepared to. The final agreement was signed on a Thursday morning. I shook her attorney's hand. He was professional about it. My wife and I didn't shake hands. We sat on opposite sides of a conference table and initialed pages for 40 minutes, and then it was done. I drove home to a different house by then, a rental in the next town over, a 3-bedroom that the kids stayed at every other week. I made dinner. I called my mother. I sat on the back porch that evening with a beer, and I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the Tuesday she'd called me in Denver, and the careful rehearsed voice, and the silence after I said I know. I thought about the back porch, and the laughing, and he never pays attention. I thought about how wrong she'd been about that. 6 months later, I bought a house. Not as big as the old one, but it's mine. I mean that literally. It's in my name. Purchased with funds from my business, structured in a way my attorney reviewed and approved before I signed. My kids have rooms there. My son has a pitching net in the backyard. My daughter has a reading corner she designed herself with string lights, and a second-hand armchair we found at an estate sale. I'm not going to tell you I'm completely over it. I'm not sure that's how it works. 16 years is a long time. There are mornings I drive past the old house. Someone else lives there now. They painted the shutters green, and I feel something that doesn't have a clean name. Not grief exactly. Not anger. Something quieter than both. But I'll tell you this. The moment she took that money, the moment she sat down and made that decision, she assumed she knew who she was dealing with. She assumed I was the same man I'd been for 16 years, the one who came home and made dinner and paid the bills and didn't ask too many questions. She assumed that when the ground shifted, I'd be standing in an open field with nothing in my hands. She was wrong about that. And I'd spent 8 months making sure she was wrong. My attorney told me, in our last meeting, that she'd seen 100 cases like mine. She said most men call her after everything has already fallen apart. After the accounts are emptied, after the papers are filed, after the house is already in dispute. She said the ones who come in early, who treat it like what it is, which is a legal and financial problem that requires preparation, those are the ones who walk away intact. I walked away intact, not without scars, not without loss, but intact. My business is still running. My kids are okay. Better than okay, actually, because the tension that had been living in our house for 2 years is gone now. And kids feel that even when they can't name it. My son told me recently, out of nowhere, that he felt like he could breathe at my house. He said it like it was just a fact he was reporting. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and handed him his plate. The joint account, the one she'd thought was the whole picture, had $43,000 in it. Everything else was somewhere she never thought to look. People ask me sometimes, not often, but occasionally, whether I feel bad about how it all went down, whether I feel like I ambushed her. And I understand why they ask. On the surface, it looks calculated. Cold, even. Man spends 8 months quietly building a wall while his wife is planning her exit. And then when she finally makes her move, the wall is already there. But here's what I actually think about when I think about those 8 months. I think about the back porch. I think about her voice, soft and laughing, saying, "He never pays attention." I didn't build that wall out of cruelty. I built it because I'd already lost something. Not the marriage, not yet, but the version of myself that just absorbed whatever came at him and called it love. I wasn't willing to lose the rest. There's something nobody tells you about betrayal. It doesn't just hurt. It clarifies. I found out who I was when I stopped reacting and started thinking. I found out I could be patient. I found out I could sit across a dinner table from someone who was actively planning to take everything I'd built and ask her how her day was and mean it neutrally, without malice, without a scene. That's not nothing. That took more out of me than the legal proceedings ever did. What I keep coming back to is this. The choices Tina made had weight to them long before that Tuesday in Denver. Every small deception, every careful misdirection, every morning she looked at me knowing what she was planning. Those things accumulated. Not in some mystical sense, just in the very practical sense that they created the situation she eventually walked into. She spent that $43,000 believing it was the knockout punch. It was the knockout punch because she'd spent years assuming I wasn't paying attention. Her confidence in that moment was built entirely on a version of me she'd invented. And when the real version turned out to be different, there was nowhere to go. I don't think she's a bad person. I've thought about it a lot and I genuinely don't. I think she made a series of decisions, each one slightly worse than the last. And by the time she picked up the phone in Denver, she was too committed to the story she told herself to see clearly. That happens to people. It happened to her. The difference between her outcome and a better one wasn't luck. It was the accumulation of choices. My kids are the part I'm most careful about. My son is 14 and he understands more than I let on, that I know he understands. My daughter is 11 and she still thinks adults mostly have things figured out. I'm not going to be the one to take that from her prematurely. What I try to do, the only thing I feel like I can actually control, is show them by example what it looks like to face something hard without losing yourself in it. Not perfectly. I have bad weeks, but I stay at it. Neil told me once, after everything was settled, that the people who come out of situations like mine intact are the ones who treat their lives like something worth protecting. Not defensively, not out of fear, but with intention, with the understanding that nobody else is going to protect what you've built if you're not willing to do it yourself. I think about my son's pitching net in the backyard. I think about my daughter's armchair with the string lights. I think about the fact that I own that house, and it is mine in every sense of the word. That's what paying attention got me.